Welcome back to America Decides. As mentioned a moment ago, Israel's cabinet is set to meet tomorrow to vote on the ceasefire and hostage release deal negotiated by the Israelis, Hamas, lots of other partners, outgoing Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration. This vote was delayed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who cited a, quote, last-minute crisis, unquote, with Hamas. Former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and one of 4 national security advisors to the first Trump administration, John Bolton, joins us now. John, it's always great to see you. Evaluate the limbo status of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas hung up in the Knesset. Do you expect the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resolve this in time to implement phase 1?
I think the odds are that the phase 1 ceasefire will go ahead, largely because, at least according to my understanding, Donald Trump has put enormous pressure on Netanyahu to agree to terms that otherwise Netanyahu might not have considered, in order for Trump to be able to declare that it was his involvement that brought the deal to fruition after these many months of negotiation. So I think unless the obstacles are more difficult than they appear, I would bet at the moment that the deal would go ahead.
It is a multi-phased deal, as you well know, John. That means the Trump administration, President Trump, is going to have to continue to lean on the Netanyahu administration to implement the other parts of it, which require some tactical and strategic decisions for the Israeli military as it relates to Gaza that some in the Netanyahu cabinet, to put it mildly, disagree with.
Right. Well, I'm not sure that Netanyahu himself necessarily is going to be agreeing to more than phase 1. Getting the hostages out, I think, is the centerpiece of what Trump's attention is. The other phases, which contemplate moving toward the end of the war, I think Trump is more likely to give Israel some leeway. And I think the real issue, the central issue for Netanyahu and perhaps for Trump as well, is not Gaza. It's what Israel may or may not do to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And so I think from the Israeli government's perspective, making an accommodation with Trump on this ceasefire hostage release matter is important to give them the flexibility that Israel may want to go after the Iranian nuclear program.
John, let's drill down on that. What do you mean by flexibility? There are those in the region who say Iran is on the run. It has lost its proxy status through Hamas in Gaza. It has lost its proxy status through Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Houthis are not as powerful or not as harassing as they were 5 or 6 months ago. And if Iran is on the run, is this now time for Israel to do what it's always wanted to do, which is bring a finality to Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, even if that means kinetic warfare?
I can't think of a better time for Israel. The very fact is, as you say, is that Iran is in the worst position it's been in probably since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So if Israel really wants to go after the nuclear program, this is the time. Moreover, I think that it would add to what is already going on inside Iran. The regime is very unpopular, has been for many years because of economic conditions. After the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, and as you say, the severe damage done to the terrorist proxies, people in Iran at the highest levels, but really across the country, are engaged in a lot of finger-pointing and recrimination. All this money, all these resources devoted to these external activities, not for the people of Iran. I think the regime is in deep trouble, and I don't think, honestly, there can possibly be sustained security and peace in the region until that regime goes. And I think that's on Israel's mind, too.
Do you think incoming Trump wants to upend the Iranian regime as we know it?
Well, he said immediately after the election that regime change was not his goal. But the end of the nuclear program was certainly the reason we reimposed sanctions after getting out of the 2015 nuclear deal. And I think the only long-term answer here, as I say, is replace that regime in Tehran. And it may be out of our control in any event. I do think the people of Iran are largely against the regime. If the supreme leader were to die and he's 85 years old and not well, they've only had 2 supreme leaders, there's no clear path to a successor, that the circumstances are such that what looks like a very imposing regime on the outside really could collapse very quickly, not unlike what happened to Assad in Syria.
One more question on Iran, John, because I know you think and have thought a lot about it. It's pretty clear the Israeli military, if it had kinetic warfare goals to eliminate the Iran nuclear program, would need help from the United States, would need air assets from the United States. That means President Trump would have to agree to partner with Israel on this particular endeavor. Could that happen in the first year of the second Trump administration, and what effect would that have in the region?
Well, I think it's unlikely Trump would have the U.S. participate directly. I would argue for that. I don't think that's what Trump is going to do. But I think that Israel's capabilities really are pretty extensive. And while there are some targets that they couldn't finish off the way we could, they could do substantial damage, closing, for example, at the Fordo enrichment site, which is deeply buried in a mountain, closing the entrance shafts and the air shafts, which would preclude enriching uranium. It's not a perfect answer, but I think Iran's air defenses have now been reduced really to fairly primitive devices. I think Israel would have freedom in the skies, and I think, as I say, they're not going to get a better opportunity.
Mike Turner is not a household name in our country, John, but you know him. He is the outgoing now chair of the House Intelligence Committee, replaced by Speaker Mike Johnson. Do you think there is anything worrisome about that development?
I think it's very worrisome. We don't know the exact circumstances, but Turner was a supporter of assistance to Ukraine. He spoke out against Trump's conduct during the classified documents investigation, what it meant for any former official, including a former president, to take these masses of classified documents and then refuse to give them back. And so I think that criticism has stung Trump. I think it's entirely possible he asked Speaker Mike Johnson to remove Mike Turner. And I'm sad to say, after what I think had been a pretty good performance as Speaker by Mike Johnson under very difficult circumstances, to bend the knee to Trump on this is a big mistake.
Related to that, Tulsy Gabbert has been nominated by the president-elect to be the Director of National Intelligence. Your level of concern about that nomination?
I think Tulsy Gabbert is dangerous. I think others of people Trump has nominated may be lacking in competence, but I think the trio of Matt Gaetz, who of course is now no longer in the running for Attorney General, Matt Gaetz, Tulsy Gabbert, and Kash Patel are a trio that really are dangerous to American national security and law enforcement. And this is very serious. I think if Gabbert were confirmed, other nations would be reluctant to share sensitive information with somebody who's shown such poor judgment. And I hope that's taken very seriously, particularly by Republicans. This is something that really has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This has to do with the integrity and security of the enormous intelligence network we have, which is critical for the security of our country.
John, there is a TikTok ban that is set to take effect by federal law January 19th. President-elect Trump has been all over the map on this. There is some suggestion he might use an executive order to delay implementation of the federal law banning TikTok as a social media platform in this country. Where do you think that should end up?
Well, I've heard the same reports. I don't know that he would have the authority to do that, but that wouldn't necessarily restrain him. I think the main problem with TikTok has nothing to do with what appears on people's screens. It's the fact that it's a vacuum cleaner for Chinese intelligence. And I'm not even sure, frankly, that the statute we're talking about, which simply requires other than Chinese ownership, would necessarily fix the situation. I would defer to experts, but you have to wonder within that app whether the Chinese vacuum cleaner is so embedded that you can't really fix it. That's the danger. It's got nothing to do with free speech. It's a question of whether this intellectual property known as TikTok is going to be allowed to be an asset of Chinese intelligence in the United States.
And the fact that the president-elect may equivocate on that, does that bother you?
Bothers me a lot, and it bothers me in part because in earlier days he was strongly against it. He was right the first time.
John Bolton, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.